include Progressive Insurance. Progressive is looking for individuals in a variety of career fields who want to help build a culture of inclusiveness. More information, including application, at progressive.com/careers.
Hello, friends, listeners. Welcome into Studio 2 here in Philadelphia. I'm Avi Wolfman-Arent.
And I'm Cherry Gregg. So, Avi, I recently got married. And yes, and in doing this,
wait, you can't
I get to the
Okay.
So I recently got married.
I can't say congratulations.
Yes, thank you.
Congratulations, Cherry Gregg.
Thank you so much. And so in embarking on this new journey, I was thinking about what does it really mean to be a wife?
Mm-hmm.
You know, growing up, there was Claire Huxtable on TV.
Yeah.
Then when I got out of college, you had Destiny's Child singing All the Women Are Independent.
Right.
And it's about being a girl boss.
That's right.
And more recently, the topic that has been trending is a term called trad wife. If you don't know what it is, I'll just tell you, it means traditional wife. But if you use the term, you will fall down a social media rabbit hole.
Like if I search the hashtag trad wife.
Yeah. Oh, my goodness. So many videos will pop up of women sort of, you know, going back to the 1950s style, stay-at-home moms, cooking, cleaning, cooking perfect bread.
Yeah.
And all these things, dressed in aprons and house dresses.
Wow.
And it got me to thinking about how the gender roles have sort of evolved in marriage over the years. We thought we had to be super moms at one point. And then now people are sort of rejecting that idea and saying, look, I want to live a soft life. I don't
even
want to do
younger
all those things.
people.
Even a lot of Gen Zs. So today we're going to talk about how gender roles in marriage have shifted over the generations, what changed, what has stayed the same, and how the images of what it means to be a wife and mother has also shifted. And we have a couple of folks an expert on gender and marriage can tell us the history. We also have a writer who explores the issue and has written about it for quite some time on the show today. And we want to hear from you. Our question of the day is, how have gender roles in marriage changed over time? What's worked and what hasn't worked in your relationship? So share with us today. The number is 888-477-9499. You can email studio2@whyy.org. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can drop your comments in the chat.
Trad wives.
Yeah, trad wives. That's the kickoff point. But, you know, everybody's marriage, everybody's relationship, partnership is so different.
It's true.
But we want to know about division of labor, how y'all came up with that. Like, what's it look like for you guys? Yeah.
I read that there's this card deck you can use. And you shuffle it, and then you randomly distribute responsibilities based on like who draws what card. This is real.
Wow.
Yeah, it's out there in the world. Question for you. Are there trad hubs or trad husbands? Is that also a trend, or is it kind of just trad wives?
Well, I don't know. Like I didn't even search trad husb. You know?
Yeah, I'm curious.
But I think there are. We had a whole show about, you know, how younger people have moved right. A lot of men do want more traditional roles in marriage because it was very defined back in the day. You provide. That was your focus, and now it's kind of squishy.
There's a simplicity and lack of choice sometimes.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah.
By the way, Sue on YouTube says it's based on a deck of cards that creates a name all the work that needs to get done, and if you choose to take responsibility for the card, you do the planning, mental load, and execution of the task. Thank you, Sue on YouTube.
Sue knows about that.
Yeah, thanks, Sue.
Okay, Sue. I love our YouTube tater tots.
Yeah,
I love
our tubers.
Yes.
All right, let's get into our trio of local news stories, starting with some big political news in Pennsylvania. Cherry, there were two special elections yesterday.
Big one.
And believe it or not, Democrats actually got good news. The first bit of good news was expected. Dems held on to a very left-leaning House seat in western Pennsylvania, and by doing so maintained their one-vote majority in the state house. Again, that was expected. But the big shock, the mini earthquake, came out of Lancaster County. It appears that Democrat James Malone will defeat Republican Josh Parsons for a state Senate seat. And this is shocking because this district voted for Donald Trump by 15 percentage points just a few months ago in November. In 2022, Cherry, Democrats did not even contest this Senate seat.
Wow.
But it was vacated because the guy who held it went to work for Dave McCormick in D.C. And so there was a special election, and it looks like the Democrat is going to win this state Senate seat, and people were truly stunned. The question, of course, is this a fluke, or is it a sign that voters are already getting frustrated with Republicans?
Yeah, I know. And this race doesn't really change the majority. You know, Republicans still hold the Senate.
Yeah. Although it's 27 to 23 now.
Yeah,
so
it's much closer.
Two votes, two seats away from a tipping point.
Yeah,
there.
it's getting closer. But it shows that, you know, Democratic voters, to me, are fired up.
Yes.
And this is usually a low turnout election. So they probably came out to express some of their frustration about what's going on in Washington. But, you know, I remember the folks who lead the Senate, Senator Vincent Hughes, all of them saying, like, we're going to work one seat at a time and try to flip the Senate at some point. And it looks like they're getting closer.
Getting closer.
Yeah.
So I'll make the argument on both sides.
Yeah.
The Republicans will say this is insignificant because it's a low turnout election.
Mm-hmm.
Democrats now, unlike in the past, are actually better at mobilizing the high information, high motivation voters.
Mm-hmm.
So this is not just an off-year election; it's a special election. About 50,000 some people have voted about what's been counted so far, and in a typical year in this Senate district, it'd be like 90,000, 100,000 votes.
Yeah, but I want to hear your other side.
Okay, so and then they would also say this is just one election,
Yeah.
and it's got the particulars of who's running against who. The other side of this is again, 15 percentage points for
That's
Trump.
a big gap.
Just 4.5 months ago. This is not like it's been a year, it's been 2 years. This is a quick change, and it's a big change. And the Republican who was running was a well-known Republican. He wasn't a nobody. He was a county commissioner. So you can't use the excuse of, well, the guy didn't have name recognition and the Democrat running was some sort of celebrity. That's not what happened here. So that's why people are really people in the political world have their spidey senses tingling a bit because of this result. That's a huge flip in a very short period of time.
Yeah. And I know Democrats are looking for any little ray of hope
Glimmer
coming.
of hope, yeah.
So, you know, we'll see what happens. But I mean, for state politics, you know, this is good for Democrats because we have a Democratic governor, state of his House run by Democrats. And now look, it's getting closer in the Senate.
Getting close.
Mm-hmm. Second story.
Yeah.
Slightly political, but not really. Mayor Parker wants to cut a city program that provided free SEPTA rides to people living below the poverty line. The program is called Zero Fare. It has provided about 6.6 million free rides since it launched about 18 months ago, serving about 25,000 people living below that poverty line, as I mentioned. And Mayor Parker's proposed budget, guess what? Doesn't have any funding for this program. So people are like, hey, she's trying to defund it. And this, by the way, had been an initiative of former Mayor Jim Kenney. Now, the city has subsidized the fares, and the original goal was sort of to help SEPTA. You know, they had been having those ridership issues caused by the pandemic, and to alleviate some of the burden that people who have low income kind of suffer when they're trying to get around. So during the first year, the SEPTA key cards have been given away by lottery, and then they got a better system, but now it may come to an end. There's also a petition to the mayor and to city council to say, you know, please keep the program going, because it's unclear why specifically the program was cut. All we know right now is that it's likely to be defunded.
I just realized I'm wearing a SEPTA sweatshirt today. No commentary intended.
You're not.
From that.
You're not part of the petition. You know.
No. I like the sweatshirt.
Yeah,
and it's a
it's
nice
peach.
I was going to say coral.
It makes sure you know.
Thanks.
Cheeks glow.
Thank you so much. But it's an interesting move, and transit advocates are paying close attention to it. This was an unusual program.
Yes.
Philadelphia, not a lot of cities do this. I will say some countries, I found out doing research this morning, have totally free transit, including Luxembourg.
Yeah, I heard that. I was like, what?
Yeah, in Luxembourg, everything's free.
Yeah.
It's also a very wealthy country, so a little easier to do.
Yeah, but you think about SEPTA, they needed the money. They probably need the money. They have that fiscal, cliff that's coming up. We've talked about that a bunch of times. So we'll see what happens.
Lots of people on YouTube, by the way, congratulating Cherry Gregg on her marriage, and we share that sentiment. And we always get such great feedback.
We do.
From our listeners.
I love our listeners.
And I have to say that yesterday, our producer, Paige, got a truly one-of-a-kind voicemail that we wanted to share with you because it raises an important point.
Yes.
Yes, hi, good afternoon. I listen to shows, to programs every afternoon. I'm 97 years old. That's right, 97, World War II.
That, by the way, is the voice of Philip, a listener who is very passionate about one particular thing on our airwaves.
Yeah.
What I'm calling about is this. Every afternoon, the person being interviewed, almost invariably, almost every day, and sometimes the person being interviewed says, and I quote, "That's a great question. That's a great question. That's a great question. That's a great question. That's a pointed question." I'm sick and tired of hearing the person being interviewed say, "That's a great question." The Moscow Wayne knows that's a great question. Jerry Gregg knows it's a great question.
Is that true, by the way? Do you know it's a great question?
Sometimes it might be, sometimes not so much.
Anyway, so Philip says, we got to deal with this. We need to put a sign in the studio telling people to never again say those 4 words.
The next time I hear "that's a great question," I will either have an MI, fall down on the floor in a spasm, or vomit. I don't know which one, maybe all 3. But I'm sick and tired of "that's a great question. That's a great question. That's a great question. That's a great question."
And that's a great voicemail from Philip. So first of all, Cherry, does he have a point?
He does have a point. And let me just say, thank you for your service. We do not want a spasm or any vomit. And
No,
so,
seriously.
You know.
Never, she made a sign.
You can't see it, but.
Says, never ever say, and I won't say it, "that's a blank question." Wait, so here's the thing, because I noticed that too. It is, let's be honest, a stall tactic for some people.
It is.
They
it's
hear
like
a
saying,
question, they're surprised by it, and they say, "Oh, that's a good question. That's a great question." So I do want to give people some grace who say that.
So when, yeah.
I don't think we can control it, even with a sign. I think this is out of our control.
And this wasn't a good sign.
But in the spirit of that voicemail, we are going to talk about some of our radio pet peeves, because we've all got them, Philip. Do you have one?
Mine is this. You hear that?
Ew.
Oh, it makes it yeah, my gag reflex comes out when I hear that.
So it's the mouth sounds.
It's the mouth sounds. I don't like it. Or breathing.
Do I do that? I think I probably do.
Or heavy breathing. I don't like that either.
By the way, our Andreas Copes, our producer, says loud breathers. That's their big one.
Jinxies.
And so you guys are simpatico on that. Producer Paige hates it when people say, quote, "which I talk about in my book." Like when they're answering a question and then they refer to their own book.
Maybe we should play this segment back to people so they know. Go ahead.
Debbie, our producer, Debbie Builder, agrees with that, but then also adds she hates when people say "right" at the end of a sentence.
You know, right? Like how we do, right? And we get down, right? Like that. Wrong. Wrong.
Do I say right to that? Anyways, no, I think you're spot on there. For me, I'll turn the lens inward and I'll say that too often I will, after someone makes a good point, this is like the flip side of what Philip's talking about. He hates it when the respondent says that's a good question. Sometimes the host will say, "Wow, fascinating, interesting." And it is a bit of a stall tactic on the host's part. I do it. And so I will admit to that. I will say on the other side of this, I really don't like it when guests insist that we read a very long title.
Yeah.
First of all, the listeners don't care. And second of all, they just want to know what you're an expert in. So if your title doesn't explain that, they don't want to hear that it's the Marion G. Smith Professor of Ecology and Environment. Yeah. And then finally, I'll give my wife's.
Ooh.
Because we're talking about marriage today. She hates something that I did already in this segment.
Which was?
When we start the show, if I don't say "welcome to Studio 2," but instead say "welcome in to Studio 2," she finds the "in" to be superfluous. You understand what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
So instead of "welcome to Studio 2," "welcome in to Studio 2." She really hates that.
Okay. Well, you know what? I'm so glad.
Producers agree.
Also, like
they also dislike welcome in.
Welcome to studio, because that's the name of the show, and we're also in studio too. So there's that.
Yeah.
But so we want to hear from you today. We're going to be
Julie hates sing-songy voices on YouTube. Julie, that's a good one too.
I love it. A lot of people agreeing with that.
I love it, Julie.
And we're talking about the evolving gender roles in marriage. We want to hear what's worked and what hasn't worked in your relationship. Email studio2@whyy.org. We'll be right back.
Welcome back in to Studio 2. I'm Avi Wolf and Aaron.
So bad. I'm Cherry Gregg. Marriage has
Bad
been
husband alert.
Marriage has been evolving for centuries. We went from dowries of land, pigs, and cows to perfect housewives spending hours cooking a pot roast. And then women across the country finally had a choice. They could choose autonomy and the workforce over staying home to cook, clean, raise children, and rely on their husband's income.
Gender dynamics in marriage have not stopped changing, and they look different in every relationship. Many households have two working parents, others count on one income. While motherhood often comes with specific challenges, most partners try to divide household tasks, and husbands and fathers are often expected to be more than just financial providers.
We started talking about modern marriage because of the rise of so-called trad wife influencers that are hugely popular on social media. These are young women who embrace a 1950s style of homemaking and sometimes submission to their husband as the head of the household. And we wondered if their millions of views point to a bigger trend. Are people interested in more conservative marriage traditions? Are we maybe not as progressive as we think?
We have two great guests joining us now for the hour. We have Jo Piazza, who is a journalist here in Philly and author of many books, including the forthcoming thriller, Everyone is Lying to You. Her podcast, Under the Influence, is a deep dive into social media influencers. Jo Piazza, welcome back to Studio 2.
Thanks for having me. I'm wearing my best trad wife dress right now.
Yeah, if you're on YouTube, you can see she's making a statement with the outfit already. So we're going to dive into that.
Yes, and we also have Stephanie Kuntz, who's joining us via Zoom. She's the Director of Research and Public Education for the Council on Contemporary Family. She's also the author of the forthcoming book, For Better and Worse, The Problematic Past and Challenging Future of Marriage. Hi, Stephanie. Welcome to Studio 2.
Thank you.
And our question for you, our listeners, how have gender roles in marriage changed over time? What's worked and what hasn't in your relationship? Call 888-477-9499, email studio2@whyy.org, or if you're on YouTube, drop your comment right there in the chat.
And so, Jo, I wanted to start with you because I know you've been tracking this whole trad wife phenomenon for a while. So I want you to kind of lay it out for us, like explain what it is, and then take us to that video or post that made you think, oh my God, this is a thing.
This is a thing. Yeah, it's fascinating because I've been looking at social media influencers, especially mom influencers, for the past 5 years. And in the past couple of years, we've seen the rise of what has been called trad wives, short for traditional wives. And these are women who are kind of cosplaying a like nostalgic mashup of what I call June Cleaver meets Laura Ingalls Wilder. So, they're in the kitchen in their fancy dresses, their beautiful, immaculate kitchens, by the way, but then also running through fields chasing after chickens and milking cows in the same immaculate dresses. Wow. And they seem to be pushing this agenda of traditional gender roles where a woman's place is in the household and a man's place is to be out making the money and supporting the family. They often have many, many children. And by many, I mean in the 6 to 8 to 10 range. And they've gained so much popularity. At first, I thought this was a blip in the social media universe. But many of these women have millions of followers. And I've interviewed hundreds of young women who follow them who are really taking these ideas to heart, who are saying, look, maybe your version of feminism, climbing the corporate ladder, working outside the home, I'm seeing a lot of women burn out. Maybe that did not work for you. And I think I like this idea of checking out of the workforce. Maybe depending on a man isn't so bad. Maybe I do want to not continue my education, not try to climb that corporate ladder, and just stay in my kitchen and bake some sourdough bread.
Yeah. And those videos of sourdough bread, by the way, we have a video that kind of explains and shows you what we've all been seeing, because I fell into the rabbit hole that is hashtag trad-wife.
Girl, how can you not?
I was like, I wasted time. I looked up and hours had passed. I was like, oh my goodness. So I want you to take a listen and take a look at just this example so you can kind of get a bit of the flavor.
Hi guys, and welcome to my channel. Today I wanted to talk about how to make the home amazing. Being a traditional wife is so much more than just cooking and cleaning and wearing house dresses. It is taking your house and making it a home.
Ladies, men hate nagging. They hate being talked to like they are a child. You can talk to your babies like that. You can talk to your girlfriends like that. But your husband views it as condescending. It is annoying to him.
After lunch, my husband was craving something sweet and was about to head out the door to grab himself some Rice Krispie treats. I told him not to hassle and that I had everything at home to make him some.
Wow. And so you said you talked to hundreds of young women. And so when we think, are they being actually influenced to sort of make life choices based on what they're seeing on social media?
They absolutely are. I have heard from many young women who are like, why am I killing myself to finish this degree when I can just find a man to take care of me and I can make these beautiful recipes and I can make my house gorgeous and I don't have to stress myself out at work like I have seen so many women doing.
Yeah.
I want to read this quote from an anonymous Gen Zer who responded to a call out from BuzzFeed. And this is a quote from apparently a young person. We have very different skill sets than men, and we're ready to embrace them. As opposed to becoming jealous of men making a lot of money and having influence, we have come to realize that we have influence over our men by being the best wives we can be. We want the old ways back. It worked for thousands of years, and then the hippies messed it up.
I saw that quote.
For all of us. Okay, so let me bring you in now, Stephanie Coons, because you know the history of all this. Did the hippies mess it up for everybody? Give us the real dope on what marriage was like in the era that these videos are hearkening back to.
Well, first of all, you want to make sure that by traditional, they mean a very short-lived period of American history.
Yeah.
The word male breadwinner wasn't even used until the mid-19th century, because before that time, women were totally co-providers. They took they did cooking and preserving, not for the family. They took it to the market to sell it or trade. It was part of their way of providing for the family. So it's not until the 1950s that children, a majority of children for the first time, begin to grow up in families where the wife does not work outside the home or in a farm, and the man brings home the money, and the kids are in school, and rather than in the labor force as they were in the past. So this is not a traditional one. And when I looked at that film, it made me laugh because they weren't making Rice Krispies. In the 1950s, this was the first boom of a consumer economy, and they were so excited about the fact that you could buy Rice Krispies and canned Campbell soup and instant Jell-O that you put canned fruit in. So, I think this is a call for leisure that is a result of the kinds of really serious pressures that American workers are under and American women feel trying to do it all.
Yeah.
Even though men are increasingly stepping up to the plate, there's still tremendous unevenness. We should get back to that fair play book that you talked about earlier.
Sure.
That has some very interesting reasons that it works. But at any rate, I don't want to go on too long. Let's let somebody else talk here.
And I think about the 1950s because everybody wasn't living this life, right? Everybody couldn't afford to be stay-at-home moms, and there were reasons, I think, legal reasons a lot of times why women were going to sort of set up to be in these more traditional marriages. And Stephanie, can you talk a little bit about that? Because I don't think people really remember that it's only been about 50 years since women have had some semblance of financial independence.
Well, I think it's really important to realize that those 1950s families, first of all, as you said, were not for everyone. There were tremendously high poverty rates then. Black Americans were subject to segregation, and women. There were two pillars that supported this family for growing numbers of working class Americans in World War II. One was a totally different economic and political situation where there were labor unions, there were much more secure jobs, rising wages, rising real wages. Every generation of young men was making more real wages than his father had made. That there were pensions that were guaranteed so there was a possibility for someone to support a family on an income. But the other pillar of that was there was no possibility for a woman to do so. They were normally fired when they got married. They had very few rights. And one of the things that scares me about any young women who are being is seduced into thinking that this is a solution to the very real pressures that they face is that women had no guarantee of being able to support themselves. They were only 15 to 17% got alimony if they were divorced. They had so in other words, it was based upon a very different set of conditions for male workers and no possibilities and no options for females who wanted to be or had to be self-supporting.
And then the pendulum swung the other way. Yeah.
So clearly there is some misremembering going on that's wrapped up in this trend. But Joe, you also mentioned this idea that there is an agenda or a movement. And Alaire on YouTube says, I like how Joe touched on the tradwife agenda. Mm-hmm. Who does this agenda serve? How is it connected to a larger political agenda, especially the more nuanced tradwife content? Because from the stuff that I've seen, the very little that I've seen, oftentimes it seems pretty straightforward. I'm making Rice Krispies. You know what I mean? It doesn't seem political.
It's meant to.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. One of the things that I've discovered in my reporting is that the right has been courting influencers for quite some time, for about a decade. And we know that the left really had Hollywood in their pocket for a long time. And so the right thought, okay, we need our own celebrities. And a lot of those celebrities are influencers, and they have been putting a lot of money behind certain tradwife influencers to push this agenda in a very beautiful, aesthetically pleasing way. And these images, these videos, they can make women participate in their own oppression and say, why do I need equal pay? Why do I need protections in the workforce? Why do we need paid childcare? If this is an easier life for me, if this is a more idyllic life for me and prettier life for me, and we are seeing a very big conservative agenda on the right being pushed to try to keep these rights from women, to roll back rights for women, much as Stephanie talked about in the 1950s when we saw these housewives. And again, the housewives were such a small sliver of the actual population because who could afford that? The interesting truth is most people can't afford it now either. We're in a precarious economy, and most families cannot be supported on a single income.
Right.
These days.
Yeah. And by the way, we want to mention that we did reach out to about a dozen trad wife influencers, but none were able to join us today. So we did try to include that perspective as well. And I want to talk about why we've sort of like fantasize this. And you touched on it a little bit, Joe, because, you know, a lot of these young people, they talk about how they saw their moms, you know, working super hard and they felt like a burden on their maybe single mom or their parents. And so they wanted to find a way to have a different life and have a different version for their kids. Can you talk about some of the psychology involved as to why some young women are very attracted to this?
Yeah, it makes so much sense. Okay. We saw a lot of women go into the workforce, be the girl bosses, and burn out because even though we raised our daughters, much as Gloria Steinem has said many times, you know, to be those bosses, to be a different kind of woman, we didn't raise sons to accommodate that. And so I don't think that we trained men or corporate America in ways to support women, to support working mothers. And it has been incredibly hard to try to have it all, to juggle all the things. I've burnt out. I worked in magazines for a long time, and I watched all of my colleagues a couple years older than me struggling to have kids, to have a family, to do it all. I get why women would want to check out of that system. But as Stephanie said, the answer cannot be to give complete autonomy and agency over to your husband, because at the end of the day, we all need a safety net and we all need financial protections. And I like to be very clear about one thing too when I talk about trad wives. Stay-at-home moms are not trad wives. Stay-at-home moms are the CEOs of their households, and the majority of those are equal partnerships. My issue with this false nostalgia for a more quote-unquote traditional time is that it is oppressing for women, that we are saying that women shouldn't have their own money, their own education, or their own safety net outside of their husband.
French Doc on YouTube agrees, says it's never a good idea to encourage financial dependence. But I would imagine, you know, if we did have one of those influencers here, they might say, look, I am celebrating the work in the domestic space, this work that gets dismissed by everybody else. I'm putting it front and center and celebrating it and showing that it can be beautiful and that it's meaningful. I mean, is that true, Joe? I mean, is there...
I do think that's true. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that there's a lot of merit in that, because I will say that, you know, for the past 20, 30 years, feminism has dismissed the work that is in the home as well. And we need to acknowledge that if we want that work to be acknowledged universally by men and women. I love that they are elevating the work in the home. I want them to admit a few things as well, though, because these influencers are making money. I know that they are making millions of dollars, the top influencers.
So they're working.
They are working. And that's why I called the book Everyone is Lying to You. It started as a satire, but they are working. Many of their husbands have quit their jobs in order to work for them. And yet they're saying, look at me, I am just a traditional wife. You know, I'm just a housewife.
You don't like the deception. You think there's a deception at the core of it.
I don't like the deception because it makes it seem like all of this is easy, and nothing about raising children, keeping a home, or marriage is easy. I do not like that all of the labor is stripped out of it.
Yeah. And by the way, I want to encourage our listeners to call in. And our question is, how have gender roles in marriage changed over time? What's worked and what hasn't worked in your relationship? The number is 888-477-9499. You can email studio2@whyy.org. And for our YouTubers, studio tubers, you can keep those comments coming. Stephanie, did you have something you wanted to add to that? Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I don't want us to think that too many people are totally buying into this. I think it's important to recognize that some of this is just sort of a way of relaxing. Yes, there are many people with the kind of right-wing agenda that Joe talked about. But the fact is that most, we know what works in marriages today, that women expect more equality from marriage. Most women do. And there's tremendous research that shows that marriages in which men and women both share income earning and childcare and housework and share it equally, getting it back to the Eve Rodsky fair play cards, which I can explain in a minute to you. Those are the ones that grow more happy over time. The other ones, even when they start out very loving, tend to get more discontented over time. So women who might enjoy this for a few years get tired of it after a while.
Yeah.
Can I explain something about the Rodsky book?
Real
Because I
quick, we're
think
coming
that's-
up on a break. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, we'll get to that on the other side of the break, Stephanie Kuntz. But thank you so much
sure.
for that perspective. Also talking with Joe Piazza. And we have a caller on the other side of this break as well.
Yes,
Let me
so
read
much.
in a few more emails. Richie, hey, Richie, one of our regulars, says the neo-trad wife movement is a completely understandable reaction to the rigors of capitalism. We've put that up already on the show, I think. And Karen, echoing what you said, Joe, creating content on Instagram and TikTok is a job. I assume they make
Underscore
money.
that one.
And
Yeah.
yes, I do think some folks are making a good deal of money. We're asking for your perspectives on marriage this hour, how you think gender dynamics within marriage have changed, how you negotiate those in your own life. This is a sharing show.
Yes, this
Email
is a
us.
safe space.
A safe, always. Studio2@WHYY.org, 888-477-9499 is the number. We'll be right back on Studio 2.
Welcome back to Studio 2. I'm Cherry Gregg.
And I'm Avi Wolfman Arendt. If you're just joining us, we're talking about how gender dynamics in marriage and parenthood have changed in recent decades. And we have two guests with us. Stephanie Kuntz joins us remotely. She's the Director of Research and Public Education for the Council on Contemporary Families and author of the forthcoming For Better and Worse, The Problematic Past and Challenging Future of Marriage.
With us in our Philadelphia studio is Joe Piazza, a journalist and author of many books, including the forthcoming thriller, Everyone is Lying to You. Her podcast, Under the Influence, is a deep dive into social media influencers.
And we're asking you, how have gender roles in marriage changed over time? What's worked and what hasn't in your relationship? 888-477-9499 is the number. The email studio2@WHYY.org, or drop a comment in the YouTube live chat. And hey, let's bring in a caller right now on line one. This is Kate from New Jersey, who I think has a question for us. Kate, you're on Studio 2. What's your question?
Thank you. You're leaving a tiny little piece out of this equation. I had for a year and a half a most blissful, happy trad wife marriage. And then my husband got a life-ending disease, and both my parents a life-ending disease. And I was working full-time around the clock for all three people. Thank God I was able to do it for 6 years. Then, because there was no money, I had to get the first job I could get for money after everybody had died and take it, and of course, predictably, it was the job from hell. So there are other outcomes from the trad wife thing. The main thing is, if everybody, male and female, had the same equal money, everybody would be fine. We would all make the right choices for the right reasons. But that's not the case now, broadly speaking, and it has never been the case in my experience.
Thank you for sharing that, Kate.
Yeah.
Really appreciate that.
Yeah.
I want to bring in another caller now. This is Luann from Glenside, and we'll react to both of these in a second. Luann's on line 2. Luann, you're on Studio 2. What's your question or comment?
Hi, Avi. Yes, comment about domestic labor and the observation that maybe feminists didn't value it. And I'm a second-wave feminist. Okay, so I've been around and watched this for a long time, and no, it was not the case that it was not valued. The economic value of domestic labor was definitely a consideration, and there was a lot of push for a movement called wages for housework. But of course, in the patriarchal system, like that went nowhere. There was also a comment, earlier in this program about how, what the problem has been is that boys have not been raised into men who value women as equals. And I believe that that is really what the crux of the matter is, and that's what we should be focusing on. And maybe we wouldn't have a bunch of incels.
Oh, wow. So Luann and
interesting comment from Luann.
Yeah, 2 great comments, 2 great calls. I want to get your reaction to all of that, Stephanie Kuntz, because one way to try to rebalance this is through, gamifying like household labor. And you mentioned that a little bit earlier. Is there a way to like break the cycle of what we've all inherited from the culture that came before us?
Yes, there is. But it is true that it takes a while to do that. I mean, we've had a lot of indoctrination into these male and female roles, even though they weren't traditional. The traditional division of labor between men and women was not one where women just picked up and cleaned toilets and did that kind of really kind of work that never gets praised. They made beer, they made bacon, they took it. It was a sort of it had its own rewards. So what we got in the 50s, as soon as work moved out of the home and men began to buy the things that had been made before, women were stuck with the most routine, difficult jobs that don't get praised, that don't get any, and that have to be done over and over again. And so nowadays, when we look at what we think were traditional male tasks and female tasks, the female ones are often much more onerous, much more boring, and much more complicated than the men actually realize. And that's why there's a lot of research that shows that dividing the chores in ways that do not assume that women are good at this and men are good at that, but that allow you to share or alternate or pick and choose. Like in my family, I do like to do the dishes. I like to cook. So I do the cooking, but I figure if I do the cooking, and I ask him to crawl under the household to get for the, the stink down there from the animal that died. We live out in the country. Then I should probably do the clean up after the kitchen as well. So that's the sort of thing you have to negotiate. And one of the reasons with this this game that you talked about earlier is that you draw the cards and then you have to do it rather than say, oh, well, she's better at this, he's going to be better at that. Yeah. And so there's a lot of ways. I mean, really, men are doing a lot more than they used to do.
Yeah.
One of the real critical ways that people find, and this is really interesting in terms of the trad wives who are just wives and don't have kids, is the real tensions come with the arrival of children, because it's impossible to do that totally equally.
Right.
Yeah.
And there have to be trade-offs there, and you have to negotiate those. But men have to understand what it takes to be part of a household in which there are children, and that's why paternity leave is so important. And one of the things that bothers me about trad wives is the discouraging of men from doing these kind of jobs that we're changing. And we need men to know what that involves, and when we find that they do it. Actually, a new study that I've from Richard Petz and some other people that I saw shows that actually divorce rates fall for couples where the man takes paternity leave.
And Stephanie, let me read a few comments here, because I think we have a couple of men commenting. Kevin says, I am a way better housewife than my female partner. She is far better equipped to work outside the home, earning a high enough wage than I am, a higher enough wage than I am. And he says these are the only reasons to live this life. And so clearly in their marriage or their relationship, she's the earner and he keeps house there. Nelson says they split the duties. He says, for cooking, my wife preps and starts soups, etc., but always asks me to touch it up with spices. So Nelson brings the spice. And Sue says, there is some work that is split on gender lines in my house. No kids, both retired now. He does outside work, lawn mowing, etc. I do bills and laundry. He does dishes. We both neglect deep cleaning of the house. Yes. And so, I just want to sort of talk about this whole evolution of gender roles and the images we see.
Yes.
Because when I was growing up, Claire Huxtable was an image that I had. And she was a working mother. She was a lawyer. She had 5 children. And she made sure her husband didn't eat too many hoagies.
She did it all, and
she did a lot.
She did, and we'll never get into the Bill Cosby of it all. We only talk about Claire.
Yeah, I only talk about Claire.
We only talk about Claire. Exactly.
But I mean, and then we saw these.
So are you saying there was something damaging in that portrayal because it was unrealistic?
No, it was the 80s were better. The 80s culturally were so much better. We also had Who's the Boss?
Yes,
Angela.
Yes,
Angela was going out at her big advertising job.
Yeah.
And Tony Danza was cleaning the house.
But and these images have sort of evolved now. And now,
see, I don't think we see them as much as we did in the 80s.
Yeah.
I think culturally, we're seeing less and less of that equal division of labor on our screens and in our pop culture.
Yeah. So you feel like the images have changed, or we just don't have as many images, and younger people are looking for them, and this is what they're getting.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Stephanie, do you have anything to add to sort of how women are educated on what a wife is supposed to be?
Well, I think that one of the things in popular culture is that there is an attempt to show that women can do all the things that men can do. We've got kick-ass women out there, martial experts and, all sorts of things like that. But there has not been the same emphasis, I agree with Joe, on showing that men can do all the things that women were supposed to do in the 50s.
Yeah, that is true.
And that's what we need.
And let me bring in some callers now, because we've got a lot of folks standing by.
I love this.
Let me start with Mark from Rocky Hill, New Jersey, on line 4. Mark, we are coming toward the end of the hour, so if you could keep it brief. You're on Studio 2. What's your question or comment?
Comment is your last 30 seconds is my reality. Okay. One of 8 kids, 65 years old. My mom was strong and independent. All my sisters are strong and independent. There's always in our family and our friends the mutual sharing and admiration. And so I haven't seen much modification or changing in these roles at all, because I'm used to that standard. And
that's fascinating. Yeah. So
Mark
Mark
look around our friends and neighbors, they have the same exact relationships and sharing and and responsibilities.
So your cultural context, your family context matters a lot. Let me also bring in now Nancy from New Jersey. New Jersey, really into this issue. Okay. Line 7, Nancy from New Jersey. You're on Studio 2, Nancy. What's your question or comment?
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I kind of blame women's lib because I think women took over half the workforce, but men did not take over half the home force. And I know my mom taught a lot of women of my generation, which is Gen X, to not be dependent on men. And the fathers would not do such a great job of doing that for our kids. And I think instead of going backwards, it would be important to keep evolving and get to the next phase where it becomes more equitable.
Yeah. Thank you
go.
for that.
I think, Joe, you're shaking your head.
Yeah.
You agree with that?
I couldn't agree more.
So am I.
Yeah, Stephanie as well. Yeah.
I have to say that I think that the evolution of feminism and equality has to include choice and agency Okay, I do think that there was a world that was very condescending to women who stayed in the home. We can't do that. We have to promote choice and agency and say you can make choices, but you also have to have control over your life, over your finances.
Yeah.
And then men really have to honestly man up.
Step up,
a lot of these trad wives, you never see their husbands. Okay, they are some hazy Marlboro man, like off in a field somewhere,
Marlboro,
where you never see their face. And I want to see more examples of men sharing the labor in culture, because even my very feminist husband, who right now is taking on more than I do in the home, because he's on a career pause, he doesn't have any role models for this, and he's hungry for them.
Can I just you mentioned the word choice. I feel like that's so key in this. Do you think part of the appeal of the trad wife influencers is that people have choice fatigue? I can choose this path or that path or this path or that path, and here's something where I'm almost like relinquishing choice and just sort of like being like, well, this is how it's supposed to be. This is the natural order. I don't have to choose anymore. Do we have some choice fatigue going on?
Well, I think that is the branding behind this.
That's the branding.
That is the branding behind this. And of course, it's not the reality, right? We're always going to have choices. Like, we're always going to be exhausted by those choices. Yeah. And life is never as simple. My favorite thing about these trad wives is so many of them are quote unquote homesteading or farming, which takes so much money, so much backbreaking labor. Again, all of this is a fantasy. Expertise that is not attainable for most people. Yeah. So I just think the messaging behind a lot of it is a lie. And I love that so many of our callers have said, I am a man who does do equal labor. I've seen this in my world, but I think that is a bubble. I think that we have a very big country right now with a lot of people who are seeing just the opposite. A lot of young men coming up saying, no, I want a trad wife. I want a woman who is just in the home, and I should be the one out making money, because we have not had those cultural shifts that say in a lot of areas outside of very progressive bubbles, those cultural shifts saying this is what a man should be doing. He should be contributing equally to a household.
So providing them those images of how to accommodate
those role models. Yes.
A different type of marriage. By the way, Christine emails and says, as a proud Gen Xer, I need to comment. I just got out of a 20-year marriage with a supposedly progressive man who ended up resenting and putting me down for having a career. When I began that career, he resented my lack of time spent with him and taking care of the home. So our marriage failed. And now she has an older partner who has offered that for her to be a stay-at-home person because he can easily afford it. However, she has a small business and decided to continue with that. And so I want to sort of talk about the fact that, you know, sometimes women get tired. And I think, you know, having this choice. So how do you sort of negotiate this? If we want to give people advice, this is something you don't really think about till you're in it. You're a wife,
of course not.
And you're like, so how do I negotiate this? How do I choose? How do I decide what's right for me? And I don't know, Stephanie, if you want to add this, because, you know, young women are coming up. They're seeing this. They want to make decisions about their life. They have no idea what it's going to be. But how do you make those decisions?
Well, I mean, it just has to be that we start talking about what we want in relationships, and we talk about that during the formation of the relationship, not after you've already
what do you need?
What do you need? What do you want? And also, I think being really open and honest about money. Okay, if you're the one making the money, okay, are you setting up a 401k for me if you ever leave? Because like Kate said, men die and they divorce you. Okay, so like it cannot be your ultimate plan if you don't have a safety net. And I think we also have to be more accommodating of the fact that it can be hard to work and to be a mother, and accommodating of career pauses and women going back into the workforce and having work experience and education so that they can do that if worst case scenario does happen. It, like Stephanie said, it's a lot about communication up front and being really open and honest. What do you want? How do you want me to be in a marriage? Because once you have kids, it just gets harder and harder to negotiate those things.
And hey, let's throw in some subsidized childcare while we're at it.
Exactly. Can we talk about that? There needs to be some policies.
Real quick, Stephanie, about 30 seconds as we wrap up.
That's what I wanted to add.
Social policy,
especially when you have kids and you have a job situation like ours with the, you know, back in the 50s, one thing they don't tell you when they're idealizing it is American workers worked an average of 100 hours less than their European counterparts. Now we work 100, 200 hours more than the average European worker. So we need to do some changing at the social level as well in terms of giving people better paid vacations, time off, no overtime, no forced overtime, and the social support system for raising families that we almost got in the 70s and then was vetoed.
Yeah.
Great conversation today.
So close.
I know.
Stephanie Kuntz, Director of Research and Public Education for the Council on Contemporary Families. Stephanie, thanks so much for your time. And Joe Piazza.
My pleasure.
Thanks for coming back to studio too. A Philly journalist, author of many books, including the forthcoming thriller, Everyone is Lying to You. And one of the characters in that book is a trad wife influencer. So if you like this conversation, you're going to want to pick up that book.
Yeah, and thank you to everybody who called and emailed and posted today. And thanks to our producers, Debbie Builder, Paige Murray Bessler, and Andreas Copes. Mike Schiffler is our visual producer. Al Banks and Tina Calicay engineered today's show. Our executive producer is Kevin McCory. I'm Cherry Gregg.
And I'm Avi Wolfman. Thanks for joining us.
Tomorrow on Studio 2, we'll discuss today's DOGE subcommittee hearing on NPR and PBS funding. House Republicans are hoping to defund public media and grill the heads of PBS and NPR about political bias in their organizations.
We will discuss the funding cuts, media bias, press freedom, and much more. That's all coming up tomorrow at noon. But up next on WHYY, it's, you guessed it, Here and Now.